Hello, so we're now going to do chapter 5. This is going to be a short one. It's just on the cell membrane. And we've kind of talked a little bit about the cell membrane when we talked about phospholipids. That is a major component of the cell membrane. So the cell membrane or plasma membrane, we call it, we have two names for it. It defines the outer border of the cells and the organelles. It manages, it transports what goes in and out of that cell or in and out of that organelle. It receives external signals and begins cellular responses. It also is important for multicellular organisms to be able to have those cells stick together, because that would be bad to fall apart. So we're also going to have mechanisms to adhere or stick to the neighboring cell. We often refer to this as called the fluid mosaic model. And it's called the fluid mosaic model because in there, the plasma membrane is very fluid. The phospholipids are moving in that plane. They're moving side to side, forward, backwards. They can't move up or down. So I always think of it as like a bobber. If you're fishing and, your bobber can move, all around in that pond. But it doesn't move down or up, right? If it does move down and you're like, yes, I got a fish, but it pops back up and you're like, crap, I lost it. My bait's gone. All right. So that's kind of what the phospholipids do because of those polar and nonpolar interactions with those polar heads and the nonpolar tails. They can kind of go back. Matter of fact, some can flip back and forth, but things will move in that cell membrane. So it is flexible yet stable. And there are some structures in there that help to stabilize it. And so that's why it's called the fluid mosaic model. And we can see in this model, we don't just have our phospholipids, we also have a lot of proteins and stuff in there. If I can get my pen to work. So we have these proteins that are in there. We have some sugars, we have cholesterol. So there's a lot more in the cell membrane than just phospholipids. So here's that picture of that phospholipid. So remember, we have that hydrophilic head. It's got all those oxygens with those phosphate groups, which don't share nicely. And so it allows it to interact with water. And then we have the hydrophobic tails, which are carbon and hydrogens, and those share very nicely. And so those give that nonpolar covalent bonding. And we talked about the difference between being saturated and unsaturated in our lipid lecture. And so we tend to draw our little cartoon phospholipid like that. And so it is called a bilayer because it is 2 layers of phospholipids. We can see our bilayer here. And that is, again, and they can move side to side, forward, backwards. They can't move down. They can move down, but they'll pop right back up because they're like, they don't get along, right? Polar versus non-polar. And again, this is going to form your boundaries of your cell and many of your organelles. We have 2 basic types of proteins when we talk about these descriptions in the membrane. We have what are called integral, and integral proteins go all the way through. Versus peripheral, which they're going to either hang on the outside or the inside. They don't go all the way through your cell membrane. We also have different proteins that have different jobs, and these are just a handful of some of the main proteins that we have in our plasma membrane. We have proteins that will help hold those cells together. We will have proteins that are enzymes, so they do a job. Some transport, they're going to move things in and out of the cell. Some cell-to-cell recognition, we need to make sure that we're self. All right, we want to make sure that cell is not a foreign cell. We also have proteins that are going to cause anchorage. They're going to hold what's called the extracellular matrix. That's some of the structure on the outside of our cell that helps hold those cells together. And then the inside with our cytoskeleton, which we've talked about the cytoskeleton when we talked about cell organelles, and some are going to be involved in sending signals. So lots of different types of proteins are inside the plasma membrane. We also have some carbohydrates. And so we have 2 different main ones that we're going to call glycoproteins. So glyco for glucose. So we have proteins that have, you see the little protein in here with the sugar attached to it. We also have what are called glycolipids. And so we have, let's see if we have a good one here. Probably the best one here would be this one. So we have this sugar group attached to a phospholipid. We also have what's called the glycocalyx, which is the coating around the cell. The glycocalyx would be out here, the exterior, which is also referred to as the extracellular matrix or the ECM. So we have two kind of layers or names for those areas. And so then again, we have this coating that helps stick cells to cells and also for identification purposes. Then you can see the cytoskeleton in here holding some of these proteins stationary. Cholesterol is important. We always have this negative, feelings about cholesterol. For some of us, it's a problem. It clogs your arteries, but we do need cholesterol. Cholesterol, not only is it the starting material of many hormones, but it also is, I call it the cell membrane buffer. It causes your cell membrane to keep a specific fluidity. You don't want your cell membrane too thick and you don't want it too runny. And so it maintains the proper viscosity of your cell membrane. So cholesterol is important. The problem is our livers can provide all the cholesterol we need. We do not. So don't sit there and say, oh, my teacher says I need to go get some McDonald's French fries. No. Diet is extra cholesterol. We don't need that. Okay. So your liver will provide all the cholesterol that you need. And then that ends this presentation on the cell membrane. It's short and sweet. And then I'll see you in the next presentation.